Imagine the world suddenly falling into a haunting, absolute silence. In an instant, pilots can't call air traffic control, and emergency dispatchers hear nothing but frantic breathing. We are exploring the terrifying immediate chaos and the strange new evolution of a humanity forced to rebuild civilization without saying a single word. Think about a normal Tuesday afternoon. You're sitting in a crowded Starbucks in downtown Manhattan, or maybe you're stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic on the I-405 in Los Angeles. The barista is shouting out an order, the radio is blasting a true crime podcast, and the person right next to you is loudly arguing with their landlord on the phone. It's the usual American soundtrack, loud, chaotic, and completely taken for granted. Then, it happens. Not an explosion, not a flash of light, just a sudden, violent absence. You go to clear your throat, but nothing comes out. You look at the barista. Their mouth is moving, but their eyes are wide with a primal, suffocating panic. The guy next to you drops his phone. He's gripping his throat, his face turning red, desperately trying to scream. But the only sound in the entire coffee shop is the mechanical hum of the espresso machine. Within 60 seconds, the realization hits like a physical blow. Every human being on Earth has just lost the ability to speak. In an instant, the foundational bedrock of human civilization is completely erased. We aren't talking about a temporary bout of laryngitis. We're talking about a sudden, inexplicable neurological severing. The biological hardware for speech is intact, but the software has been completely wiped clean. This isn't just a story about a quiet world. It's a story about immediate, catastrophic collapse, followed by a bizarre, mind-bending evolution of the human race. How long would it take for America to fall apart? And more importantly, how do you rebuild a society when no one can even say help? Let's look at the first hour. If you think we'd all just calmly pull out our iPhones and start typing, you drastically underestimate how much of our modern infrastructure relies on instantaneous vocal communication. Look at the skies over the United States. At any given moment, there are thousands of commercial aircraft flying over the US. Remember when a minor FAA system outage grounded flights nationwide and caused total gridlock? Now, imagine that, but multiplied by 1,000, Delta Flight 412 is descending into LAX. The pilot clicks his radio to confirm landing clearance. He opens his mouth and nothing happens. Up in the control tower, air traffic controllers are staring at their radars, trying to issue warnings about crosswinds, but they are completely mute. Within the first 30 minutes, mid-air collisions become a mathematical certainty. Planes can't coordinate. Airports go into immediate, terrifying lockdown. On the ground, the situation is even more horrific. Think about the 911 emergency system. In the US alone, 911 dispatchers handle over 600,000 calls a day. Suddenly, every single call ringing into dispatch centers from Seattle to Miami is exactly the same. Dead silence followed by frantic, heavy breathing. Dispatchers can't ask for addresses. Paramedics can't radio ahead to hospitals to prep an operating room. If a fire breaks out in a Chicago apartment building, there is no way to yell fire to wake up the neighbors. And then comes the psychological horror. Human beings are hardwired to use our voices when we are terrified. It's an evolutionary reflex, the alarm call. When that reflex is broken, the brain short circuits. People begin to hyperventilate. In the streets of major cities, mass panic sets in not because of what people are doing, but because of the eerie, unnatural silence of the crowd. It feels like the end of the world, because, in a way, it is. By day 3, the initial shock fades, and structural rot sets in. Let's talk about the economy. Wall Street is built on algorithms, sure, but it's also built on human split-second decisions. When the Federal Reserve or major banking CEOs can't hold emergency press conferences or give verbal directives, trust completely evaporates. The stock market undergoes a circuit breaker halt almost immediately and stays closed indefinitely. But the real crisis is at your local supermarket. Supply chains are delicate webs. A truck driver delivering groceries from a distribution center in Ohio to a grocery store in Pennsylvania relies on calling dispatch to report delays, mechanical issues, or routing changes. Without speech, logistics break down. If a truck breaks down on the side of the interstate, the driver can't easily call for a tow. But wait, why don't they just text? Here's the catch. The internet and cellular networks don't run themselves. They require constant 24/7 maintenance by engineers and technicians. When a server farm in Virginia overheats or a fiber optic cable is damaged, teams of engineers usually hop on a conference call to coordinate a fix. Without the ability to talk, complex technical coordination slows down by 90%. Typing out technical instructions takes too long when a system is failing in real time. Within the first week, cellular networks begin to degrade due to unaddressed glitches. The texting safety net starts to rip open, and then there's governance. The President of the United States can no longer address the nation via the Oval Office. White House press briefings are dead. The government is forced to communicate via typed, printed manifestos distributed to the public. But without the reassuring tone of a human voice, rumors and conspiracy theories spread like wildfire. Is it a bioweapon? An alien attack? Punishment from God? Without a unifying voice to calm the public, localized pockets of martial law and civil unrest spark across the country. But let's look deeper. Let's look inside our own heads. What happens to the human mind when it is forced into absolute vocal exile? Psychologists have long debated the concept of the inner monologue, that little voice in your head that narrates your day. For most of us, that inner voice speaks in our native language. But what happens when the physical act of speaking is permanently deleted from our biology? Scientists at institutions like MIT and Stanford would be working in total silence to figure this out. They would quickly realize something fascinating. The brain is incredibly plastic. Initially, people would experience severe depression and feelings of profound isolation. Language is how we externalize our souls. Without it, we are trapped inside our own skulls. But after a few weeks, a strange neurological shift would begin to occur. Abstract thought would start to detach from vocalization. Think about it. When you think of the word apple, your brain often implicitly processes the sound of the word. But without speech, humans would start thinking purely in visual logic and spatial concepts. Our dreams would change. They would become hyper-vivid, relying heavily on color, geometry, and emotion rather than dialogue. In everyday life, American culture would undergo a massive, rapid transformation. We are a culture obsessed with noise, podcasts, talk radio, scream matches on cable news. All of that is gone. In its place, a new visual literacy is born, American Sign Language, which was previously used by the deaf and hard of hearing community, suddenly becomes the most valuable commodity on the planet. Imagine the scene. ASL speakers, who were once a minority, are suddenly thrust into positions of immense power. They become the tribal leaders, the educators, the executives. High schools and universities, or what's left of them, are converted into massive visual training centers. Every American is forced to learn to communicate with their hands, their eyes, and their facial expressions. But here's the kicker. Standard sign language takes time to master. In the interim, regular citizens develop a crude, highly regionalized form of pantomime. A gesture in Texas might mean something completely different than a gesture in New York. The country begins to fracture into visual dialect. Let's skip ahead. 5 years into the silence, the initial chaos has settled. Human resilience is undefeated, and we have rebuilt. But the United States of America looks radically, fundamentally different than it did before. First, look at our architecture and city planning. Cities are now completely redesigned for line of sight. Because you can't yell around a corner to warn someone, blind spots in public spaces are eliminated. Streets are wider. Walls are made of smart glass or covered in massive LED screens that display real-time, icon-based public announcements. The political landscape is unrecognizable. Imagine a presidential debate in this new world. There are no podiums, no microphones, no interrupting or shouting over one another. Instead, two candidates stand on a stage in front of millions of viewers, their hands moving with lightning speed, their expressions sharp and calculated. Political campaigns are won not by the most charismatic speaker, but by the most visually expressive and precise communicator. And what about entertainment? Hollywood as we know it is dead. The era of the fast-talking superhero or the dialogue-heavy drama is gone. Instead, we see a massive renaissance of a new kind of cinema, hyper-stylized visual storytelling that blends the emotive power of old silent films with high-tech visual effects and deeply moving musical scores. Music itself changes. Lyrics disappear, replaced by complex instrumental arrangements that evoke the emotions we can no longer speak out loud.
But the most profound change is in our relationships. Before the silence, it was easy to lie. We hid behind polite small talk, sarcasm, and deceptive vocal tones. But you cannot easily fake a micro-expression when communicating visually. To look at someone is to truly read them. Deception becomes incredibly difficult. Relationships become deeper, more raw, and intensely empathetic. We learn to read the tension in a shoulder, the dilation of a pupil, the subtle hesitation of a hand gesture. Humanity has become, in essence, a giant, interconnected web of quiet observation. If every human on Earth simultaneously lost the ability to speak, it would undoubtedly be the most painful, terrifying tragedy our species has ever faced. Millions would die in the initial weeks from the breakdown of our fragile, loud systems. But if history has taught us anything, it's that humans do not just break, we adapt. Generations later, children would be born who have never heard a human voice. Their vocal cords would remain intact, used only for laughter, crying, or involuntary gasps of pain. To them, the concept of talking would sound like an ancient, clumsy myth, a primitive way of communicating that required making noise through a hole in your face. They would look back at our loud, chaotic arguing world and wonder how we ever got anything done. We would have lost our words, but we might have finally found a way to truly understand each other. Listen to the silence.
The silence has only begun. To be continued. If you want to see what happens next, subscribe now.